Principles of Freedom by Terence MacSwiney, Chapter 1. The Basis of Freedom. Why should we fight for freedom? Is it not strange that it has become necessary to ask and answer this question? We have fought our fight for centuries, and contending parties still continue the struggle. But the real significance of the struggle and its true motive force are hardly at all understood, and there is a curious but logical result. Men technically on the same side are separated by differences wide and deep, both of ideal and plan of action, while, conversely, men technically opposed have perhaps more in common than we realize, in a sense deeper than we understand. This is the question I would discuss. I find in practice everywhere in Ireland, it is worse out of Ireland, the doctrine, the end justifies the means. One party will denounce another for the use of discreditable tactics, but it will have no hesitation in using such itself if it can thereby snatch a discreditable victory. So, clear speaking is needed. A fight that is not clean-handed will make victory more disgraceful than any defeat. I make the point here because we stand for separation from the British Empire, and because I have heard it argued that we ought, if we could, make a foreign alliance to crush English power here, even if our foreign allies were engaged in crushing freedom elsewhere. When such a question can be proposed, it should be answered, though the time is not ripe to test it. If Ireland were to win freedom by helping, directly or indirectly, to crush another people, she would earn the execration she has herself poured out on tyranny for ages. I have come to see it is possible for Ireland to win her independence by base methods. It is imperative, therefore, that we should declare ourselves and know where we stand. And I stand by this principle. No physical victory can compensate for spiritual surrender. Whatever side denies that is not my side. What, then, is the true basis to our claim for freedom? There are 2 points of view. The first we have when fresh from school, still in our teens, ready to tilt against everyone and everything, delighting in saying smart things, and able sometimes to say them, talking much and boldly of freedom, but satisfied if the thing sounds bravely. There is the later point of view. We are no longer boys. We have come to review the situation and take a definite stand in life. We have had years of experience, keen struggles, not a little bitterness, and we are steadied. We feel our heartbeat for deeper things. It is no longer sufficient that they sound bravely. They must ring true. The schoolboy's dream is more of a Roman triumph, tramping armies, shouting multitudes, and waving banners, all good in their own way. But the dream of men is for something beyond all this show. If it were not, it could hardly claim a sacrifice. A spiritual necessity makes the true significance of our claim to freedom. The material aspect is only a secondary consideration. A man facing life is gifted with certain powers of soul and body. It is of vital importance to himself and the community that he be given a full opportunity to develop his powers and to fill his place worthily. In a free state, he is in the natural environment for full self-development. In an enslaved state, it is the reverse. When one country holds another in subjection, that other suffers materially and morally. It suffers materially being a prey for plunder. It suffers morally because of the corrupt influences the bigger nation sets at work to maintain its ascendancy. Because of this moral corruption, national subjection should be resisted. As a state fostering vice, and as in the case of vice, when we understand it, we have no option but to fight. With it we can make no terms. It is the duty of the rightful power to develop the best in its subjects. It is the practice of the usurping power to develop the basest. Our history affords many examples. When our rulers visit Ireland, they bestow favours and titles on the supporters of their regime. But it is always seen that the greatest favours and highest titles are not for the honest adherent of their power, but for him who has betrayed the national cause that he entered public life to support. Observe the men who might be respected and passed over for him who ought to be despised. In the corrupt politician there was surely a better nature. A free state would have encouraged and developed it. The usurping state titled him for the use of his baser instincts. Such allurement must mean demoralization. We are none of us angels, and under the best of circumstances find it hard to do worthy things. When all the temptation is to do unworthy things, we are demoralized. Most of us, happily, will not give ourselves over to the evil influence, but we lose faith in the ideal. We are apathetic. We have powers and let them lie fallow. Our minds should be restless for noble and beautiful things. They are hopeless in a land everywhere confined and wasted. In the destruction of spirit entailed lies the deeper significance of our claim to freedom. It is a spiritual appeal, then, that primarily moves us. We are urged to action by a beautiful ideal. The motive force must likewise be true and beautiful. It is love of country that inspires us, not hate of the enemy and desire for full satisfaction for the past. Pause a while. We are all irritated now and then by some mawkish interpretation of our motive force that makes it seem a weakly thing, invoked to help us in evading difficulties instead of conquering them. Love in any genuine form is strong, vital, and warm-blooded. Let it not be confused with any flabby substitute. Take a parallel case. Should we, because of the mawkishness of a princess novelette, deride the beautiful dream that keeps ages wondering and joyous, that is occasionally caught up in the words of genius, as when Shelley sings, "I arise from dreams of thee"? When foolish people make a sacred thing seem silly, let us at least be sane. The man who cries out for the sacred thing but voices a universal need. To exist, the healthy mind must have beautiful things, the rapture of song, the music of running water, the glory of the sunset and its dreams, and the deeper dreams of the dawn. It is nothing but love of country that rouses us to make our land full-blooded and beautiful, where now she is pallid and wasted. This, too, has its deeper significance. If we want full revenge for the past, the best way to get it is to remain as we are. As we are, Ireland is a menace to England. We need not debate this. She herself admits it by her continued efforts to pacify us in her own stupid way. Would she not ignore us if it were quite safe to do so? On the other hand, if we succeed in our efforts to separate from her, the benefit to England will be second only to our own. And this might strike us strangely, but 'tis true, not the less true because the English people could hardly understand or appreciate it now. The military defence of Ireland is almost farcical. A free Ireland could make it a reality, could make it strong against invasion. This would secure England from an attack on our side. No one is, I take it, so foolish as to suppose, being free, we would enter quarrels not our own. We should remain neutral. Our common sense would so dictate, our sense of right would so demand it. The freedom of a nation carries with it the responsibility that it be no menace to the freedom of another nation. The freedom of all makes for the security of all. If there are tyrannies on earth, one nation cannot set things right. But it is still bound so to order its own affairs as to be consistent with universal freedom and friendship. And, again, strange as it may seem, separation from England will not alone make for final friendship with England. For no one is so foolish as to wish to be forever at war with England. It is unthinkable. Now the most beautiful motive for freedom is vindicated. Our liberty stands to benefit the enemy instead of injuring him. If we want to injure him, we should remain as we are, a menace to him. The opportunity will come, but it would hardly make us happy. This makes clear a need of the human race. Freedom, rightly considered, is not a mere setting up of a number of independent units. It makes for harmony among nations and good fellowship on earth. I have written carefully that no one may escape the conclusion. It is clear and exacting, but in the issue it is beautiful. We fight for freedom, not for the vanity of the world, not to have a fine conceit of ourselves, not to be as bad, or if we prefer to put it so, as big as our neighbours. The inspiration is drawn from a deeper element of our being. We stifle for self-development individually and as a nation. If we don't go forward, we must go down. It is a matter of life and death. It is our soul's salvation. If the whole nation stand for it, we are happy. We shall be grandly victorious. If only a few are faithful found, they must be the more steadfast for being but a few. They stand for an individual right that is inalienable. A majority has no right to annul it, and no power to destroy it. Tyrannies may persecute, slay, or banish those who defend it. The thing is indestructible. It does not need legions to protect it, nor genius to proclaim it, though the poets have always glorified it, and the legions will ultimately acknowledge it. One man alone may vindicate it, and because that one man has never failed, it has never died. Not, indeed, that Ireland has ever been reduced to a single loyal son. She never will be. We have not survived the centuries to be conquered now. But the profound significance of the struggle, of its deep spiritual appeal, of the imperative need for a motive force as lofty and beautiful, of the consciousness that worthy winning of freedom is a labour for human brotherhood, the significance of it all is seen in the obligation it imposes on everyone to be true, the majority notwithstanding. He is called to a grave charge who is called to resist the majority. But he will resist, knowing his victory will lead them to a dearer dream than they had ever known. He will fight for that ideal in obscurity, little heeded in the open, misunderstood, in humble places still undaunted, in high places seizing every vantage point, never crushed, never silent, never despairing, cheering a few comrades with hope for the morrow. And should these few sink in the struggle, the greatness of the ideal is proven in the last hour. As they fall, their country awakens to their dream, and he who inspired and sustained them is justified against the whole race. He who once stood alone against them. In the hour he falls, he is the saviour of his race. Chapter 2. Separation. When we plead for separation from the British Empire as the only basis on which our country can have full development, and on which we can have final peace with England, we find in opponents a variety of attitudes, but one attitude invariably absent, a readiness to discuss the question fairly and refute it, if this can be done. One man will take it superficially and heatedly, assuming it to be, according to his party, a censure on Mr. Redmond or Mr. O'Brien. Another will take it superficially, but, as he thinks, philosophically, and will dismiss it with a smile. With the followers of Mr. Redmond and Mr. O'Brien we can hardly argue at present, but we should not lose heart on their account, for these men move en masse. One day the consciousness of the country will be electrified with a great deed or a great sacrifice, and the multitude will break free from lethargy and prejudice, and march with a shout for freedom in a true, a brave, and a beautiful sense. We must work and prepare for that hour. Then there is our philosophical friend. I expect him to hear my arguments. When I am done, he may not agree with me on all points. He may not agree with me on any point. But if he come with me, I promise him one thing. This question can no longer be dismissed with a smile. Our friend's attitude is explained in part by our never having attempted to show that a separatist policy is great and wise. We have held it as a right, have fought for it, have made sacrifices for it, and vowed to have it at any cost, but we have not found for it a definite place in a philosophy of life. Superficial though he be, our friend has indicated a need. We must take the question philosophically, but in the great and true sense. It is a truism of philosophy and science that the world is a harmonious whole, and that with the increase of knowledge, laws can be discovered to explain the order and the unity of the universe. Accordingly, if we are to justify our own position as separatists, we must show that it will harmonize, unify, and develop our natural life, that it will restore us to a place among the nations, enable us to fulfill a national destiny, a destiny which, through all our struggles, we ever believe is great and waiting for us. That must be accepted if we are to get at the truth of the matter. A great doctrine that dominates our lives, that lays down a rigid course of action, that involves self-denial, hard struggles, endurance for years, and possibly death before the goal is reached. Any such doctrine must be capable of having its truth demonstrated by the discovery of principles that govern and justify it. Otherwise, we cannot yield it our allegiance. Let us to the examination, then. We shall find it soul-stirring and inspiring. We must be prepared, however, to abandon many deeply rooted prejudices. If we are unwilling, we must abandon the truth. But we will find courage in moving forward, and will triumph in the end, by keeping in mind at all times that the end of freedom is to realize the salvation and happiness of all peoples, to make the world, and not any selfish corner of it, a more beautiful dwelling place for men. Treated in this light, the question becomes for all earnest men great and arresting. Our friend, who may have smiled, will discuss it readily now. Yet he may not be convinced. He may point his finger over the wasted land and contrast its weakness with its opponent's strength and conclude, "Your philosophy is beautiful, but only a dream." He is at least impressed. That is a point gained, and we may induce him to come further and further till he adopts the great principle we defend. His difficulty now is the common error that a man's work for his country should be based on the assumption that it should bear full effect in his own time. This is most certainly false, for a man's life is counted by years, a nation's by centuries, and his work for the nation should be directed to bringing her to full maturity in the coming time. A man must be prepared to labour for an end that may be realised only in another generation. Consider how he disposes his plans for his individual life. His boyhood and youth are directed that his manhood and prime may be the golden age of life, full-blooded and strong-minded, with clear vision and great purpose and high hope, all justified by some definite achievement. A man's prime is great, as his earlier years have been well directed and concentrated. In the early years the ground is prepared and the seed sown for the splendid period of full development. And so it is with the nation. We must prepare the ground and sow the seed for the rich ripeness of maturity. And bearing in mind that the maturity of the nation will come, not in one generation but after many generations, we must be prepared to work in the knowledge that we prepare for a future that only other generations will enjoy. It does not mean that we shall work in loneliness, cheered by no vision of the promised land. We may even reach the promised land in our time, though we cannot explore all its great wonders. That will be the delight of ages. But some will never survive to celebrate the great victory that will establish our independence. Yet they shall not go without reward, for to them will come a vision of soul of the future triumph, an exaltation of soul in the consciousness of labouring for that future, an exultation of soul in the knowledge that once its purpose is grasped, no tyranny can destroy it, that the destiny of our country is assured, and her dominion will endure forever. Let any argument be raised against one such pioneer. He knows this in his heart, and it makes him indomitable, and it is he who is proven to be wise in the end. He judges the past clearly, and through the crust of things he discerns the truth in his own time, and puts his work in true relation to the great experience of life, and he is justified. For ultimately his work opens out, matures, and bears fruit 100-fold. It may not be in a day, but when his hand falls dead, his glory becomes quickly manifest. He has lived a beautiful life, and has left a beautiful field. He has sacrificed the hour to give service for all time. He has entered the company of the great, and with them he will be remembered forever. He is the practical man in the true sense. But there is the other self-styled practical man who thinks all this proceeding foolish, and cries out for the expedient of the hour. Has he ever realized the promise of his proposals? No. He is the most inefficient person who has ever walked the earth. But for a saving consideration, let him go contemplate the wasted efforts of the opportunist in every generation, and the broken projects scattered through the desert places of history. Still one will look out on the grim things of the hour, and hypnotized by the hour will cry, "See the strength of the British Empire, see our wasted state, your hope is in vain." Let him consider this clear truth. Peoples endure, empires perish. Where are now the empires of antiquity? And the empires of today have the seed of disillusion in them. But the peoples that saw the old empires rise and hold sway are represented now in their posterity. The tyrannies they knew are dead and done with. The people endured, the empires perished. And the nations of the earth of this day will survive in posterity when the empires that now contend for mastery are gathered into the dust with all dead and bad things. We shall endure, and the measure of our fate will be the measure of our achievement and of the greatness of our future place. Is it not the dream of earnest men of all parties to have an end to our long war, a peace final and honourable, wherein the soul of the country can rest, revive and express itself, wherein poetry, music, and art will pour out in uninterrupted joy, the joy of deliverance, flashing in splendour and superabundant in volume, evidence of long suppression? This is the dream of us all. But who can hope for this final peace while any part of our independence is denied? For while we are connected in any shape with the British Empire, the connection implies some dependence. This cannot be gainsaid. And who is so foolish as to expect that there will be no collision with the British Parliament while there is this connection implying dependence on the British Empire? If such a one exists, he goes against all experience and all history. On either side of the connection will be two interests, the English interest and the Irish interest, and they will be always at variance. Consider how parties within a single state are at variance, conservatives and radicals in any country in Europe. The proposals of one are always insidious, dangerous, or reactionary, as the case may be, in the eyes of the other, and in no case will the parties agree. They will at times even charge each other with treachery. There is never peace. It is the rule of party war. Who then can hope for peace where into the strife is imported a race difference, where the division is not of party but of people? That is in truth the vain hope. And be it borne in mind, the race difference is not due to our predominating Gaelic stock, but to the separate countries and to distinct households in the human race. If we were all of English extraction, the difference would still exist. There is the historic case of the American states. It is easy to understand. When a man's children come of age, they set up establishments for themselves and live independently. They are always bound by affection to the parent home. But if the father tries to interfere in the house of the son and govern it in any detail, there will be strife. It is hardly necessary to labour this point. If all the people in this country were of English extraction, and England were to claim on that account that there should be a connection with her, and that it should dominate the people here, there would be strife, and it could have but one end: separation. We would, of whatever extraction, have lived in natural neighbourliness with England, but she chose to trap and harass us, and it will take long generations of goodwill to wipe out some memories. Again and yet again let there be no confusion of thought as to the final peace. It will never come while there is any formal link of dependence. The spirit of our manhood will always flame up to resent and resist that link. Separation and equality may restore ties of friendship. Nothing else can, for individual development and general goodwill is the lesson of human life. We can be good neighbours, but most dangerous enemies, and in the coming time our hereditary foe cannot afford to have us on her flank. The present is promising, the future is developing for us. We shall reach the goal. Let us see to it that we shall be found worthy. And that we be found worthy, let this be borne in mind, for it is true that here only is our great danger. If with our freedom to win, our country to open up, our future to develop, we learn no lessons from the mistakes of nations, and live no better life than the great powers, we shall have missed a golden opportunity, and shall be one of the failures of history. So far, on superficial judgment, we have been accounted a failure, though the simple maintenance of our fight for centuries has been in itself a splendid triumph. But then only would we have failed in the great sense, when we had got our field and wasted it, as the nations around us waste theirs today. We led Europe once. Let us lead it again with a beautiful realization of freedom. And let us beware of the delusion that is abroad, that we seek nothing more than to be free of restraint, as England, France, and Germany are today. Let us beware of the delusion that if we can scramble through anyhow to freedom, we can then begin to live worthily, but that in the interval we cannot be too particular. That is the grim shadow that darkens our path, that falls between us and a beautiful human life, and may drive us to that tiger-like existence that makes havoc through the world today. Let us beware. I do not say we must settle now all disputes, such as capital, labour, and others, but that everyone should realize a duty to be high-minded and honourable in action, to regard his fellow not as a man to be circumvented, but as a brother to be sympathized with and uplifted. Neither kingdom, republic, nor commune can regenerate us. It is in the beautiful mind, and a great ideal we shall find the charter of our freedom, and this is the philosophy that it is most essential to preach. We must not ignore it now, for how we work today will decide how we shall live tomorrow, and if we are not scrupulous in our struggle, we shall not be pure in our future state. I know there are many who are not indifferent to high-minded action, but who live in dread of an exacting code of life, fearing it will harass our movements and make success impossible. Let us correct this mistake with the reflection that the time is shaping for us. The power of our country is strengthening, the grip of the enemy is slackening. Every extension of local government is a step nearer to independent government. The people are not satisfied with an installment. Their capacity for further power is developed, and they are equipped with weapons to win it. Even in our time have we made great advance. Let one fact alone make this evident. Less than 20 years ago the Irish language was despised. Today the movement to restore it is strong enough to have it made compulsory in the National University. Can anyone doubt from this sign of the times alone that the hour points to freedom, and we are on the road to victory? That we shall win our freedom I have no doubt. That we shall use it well I am not so certain, for see how sadly misused it is abroad through the world today. That should be our final consideration, and we should make this resolution. our future history shall be more glorious than that of any contemporary state. We shall look for prosperity, no doubt, but let our enthusiasm be for beautiful living. We shall build up our strength, yet not for conquest, but as a pledge of brotherhood and a defence for the weaker ones of the earth. We shall take pride in our institutions, not only as guaranteeing the stability of the state, but as securing the happiness of the citizens. And we shall lead Europe again as we led it of old. We shall rouse the world from a wicked dream of material greed, of tyrannical power, of corrupt and callous politicians, to the wonder of a regenerated spirit, a new and beautiful dream. And we shall establish our state in a true freedom that will endure forever. Chapter 3. Moral Force. One of the great difficulties in discussing any question of importance in Ireland is that words have been twisted from their original and true significance, and if we are to have any effective discussion, we must first make clear the meaning of our terms. Love of country is quoted to tolerate every insidious error of weakness, but if it has any meaning it should make men strong-souled and resolute in every crisis. Men working for the extension of local government toast Ireland a nation, and extol Home Rule as independence. But while there is any restraint on us by a neighbouring power, acknowledged superior, there is dependence to that extent. Straightway those who fight for independence shift their ground and plead for absolute independence, but there is no such thing as qualified independence, and when we abandon the simple name to men of half measures, we prejudice our cause and confuse the issue. Then there is the irreconcilable. How is he regarded in the common cry? Always an impossible, wild, foolish person, and we frequently resent the name and try to explain his reasonableness instead of exulting in his strength. For the true irreconcilable is the simple lover of the truth. Among men fighting for freedom, some start up in their plea for liberty, pointing to the prosperity of England, France, and Germany. And when we debate the means by which they won their power, we find our friends draw no distinction between true freedom and licentious living. But it would be better to be crushed under the wheels of great powers than to prosper by their example. And so, through every discussion, we must make clear the meaning of our terms. There is one I would treat particularly now. Of all the terms glibly flung about in every debate, not one has been so confused as moral force. Since the time of O'Connell, the cry of moral force has been used persistently to cover up the weakness of every politician who is afraid or unwilling to fight for the whole rights of his country, and confusion has been the consequence. I am not going here to raise old debates over O'Connell's memory, who, when all is said, was a great man and a patriot. Let those of us who read with burning eyes of the shameless fiasco of Clontarf recall for full judgment the O'Connell of earlier years, when his unwearied heart was fighting the uphill fight of the pioneer. But a great need now is to challenge his later influence, which is overshadowing us to our undoing. For we find men of this time who lack moral courage fighting in the name of moral force, while those who are preeminent as men of moral fibre are dismissed with a smile, physical force men. To make clear the confusion, we need only to distinguish moral force from moral weakness. There is a distinction. Call it what we will, moral courage, moral strength, moral force, we all recognize that great virtue of mind and heart that keeps a man unconquerable above every power of brute strength. I call it moral force, which is a good name, and I make the definition. A man of moral force is he who, seeing a thing to be right and essential and claiming his allegiance, stands for it as for the truth, unheeding any consequence. It is not that he is a wild person utterly reckless of all mad possibilities, filled with a madder hope and indifference to any havoc that may ensue. No, but it is a first principle of his, that a true thing is a good thing, and from a good thing rightly pursued can follow no bad consequence. And he faces every possible development with conscience at rest. It may be with trepidation for his own courage in some great ordeal, but for the nobility of the cause and the beauty of the result that must ensue, always with serene faith. And soon the trepidation for himself passes, for a great cause always makes great men, and many who set out in hesitation die heroes. This it is that explains the strange and wonderful buoyancy of men, standing for great ideals, so little understood of others of weaker mould. The soldier of freedom knows he is forward into the battle of truth. He knows his victory will make for a world beautiful, that if he must inflict or endure pain, it is for the regeneration of those who suffer, the emancipation of those in chains, the exaltation of those who die, and the security and happiness of generations yet unborn. For the strength that will support a man through every phase of his struggle, a strong and courageous mind is the primary need. In a word, moral force. A man who will be brave only if tramping with a legion will fail in courage if called to stand in the breach alone. And it must be clear to all that till Ireland can again summon her banded armies, there will be abundant need for men who will stand the single test. 'Tis the bravest test, the noblest test, and 'tis the test that offers the surest and greatest victory. For one armed man cannot resist a multitude, nor one army conquer countless legions, but not all the armies of all the empires of earth can crush the spirit of one true man, and that one man will prevail. But so much have we felt the need of resisting every slavish tendency that found refuge under the name of moral force, that those of us who would vindicate our manhood cried wildly out again for the physical test, and we cried it long and repeatedly, the more we smarted under the meanness of retrograde times. But the time is again inspiring, and the air must now be cleared. We have set up for the final test of the man of unconquerable spirit, that test which is the first and last argument of tyranny, recourse to brute strength. We have surrounded with fictitious glory the carnage of the battlefields. We have shouted of wading through our enemy's blood, as if bloody fields were beautiful. We have been contemptuous of peace, as if every war were exhilarating. But war is hell, said a famous general in the field. This, of course, is exaggeration, but there is a grim element of truth in the warning that must be kept in mind at all times. If one among us still would resent being asked to forego what he thinks a rightful need of vengeance, let him look into himself. Let him consider his feelings on the death of some notorious traitor or criminal. Not satisfaction, but awe is the uppermost feeling in his heart. Death sobers us all. But away from death this may be unconvincing, and one may still shout of the glory of floating the ship of freedom in the blood of the enemy. I give him pause. He may still correct his philosophy in view of the horror of a street accident or the brutality of a prize fight. But war must be faced and blood must be shed, not gleefully, but as a terrible necessity. Because there are moral horrors worse than any physical horror. Because freedom is indispensable for a soul erect, and freedom must be had at any cost of suffering. The soul is greater than the body. This is the justification of war. If hesitating to undertake it means the overthrow of liberty possessed, or the lying passive in slavery already accomplished, then it is the duty of every man to fight if he is standing, or revolt if he is down. And he must make no peace till freedom is assured. For the moral plague that eats up a people whose independence is lost is more calamitous than any physical rending of limb from limb. The body is a passing phase. The spirit is immortal. And the degradation of that immortal part of man is the great tragedy of life. Consider all the mean things and debasing tendencies that wither up a people in a state of slavery. There are the bribes of those in power to maintain their ascendancy, the barter of every principle by time-servers, the corruption of public life and the apathy of private life, the hard struggle of those high ideals, the conflict with all the noble practices, the wearing down of patience, and, in the end, the quiet abandoning of the flag once bravely flourished. Then the increased numbers of the apathetic, and the general gloom, depression, and despair. Everywhere a land decaying. Viciousness, meanness, cowardice, intolerance, every bad thing arises like a weed in the night and blights the land where freedom is dead. And the aspect of that land and the soul of the people become spectacles of disgust, revolting and terrible. Terrible for the high things degraded and the great destinies imperiled. It would be less terrible if an earthquake split the land in two and sank it into the ocean. To avert the moral plague of slavery, men fly to arms, notwithstanding the physical consequence, and those who set more count by the physical consequences cannot by that avert them, for the moral disease is followed by physical wreck, if delayed still inevitable. So, physical force is justified, not per se, but as an expression of moral force. Where it is unsupported by the higher principle, it is evil incarnate. The true antithesis is not between moral force and physical force, but between moral force and moral weakness. That is the fundamental distinction being ignored on all sides. When the time demands and the occasion offers, it is imperative to have recourse to arms, but in that terrible crisis we must preserve our balance. If we leap forward for our enemy's blood, glorifying brute force, we set up the standard of the tyrant and heap up infamy for ourselves. On the other hand, if we hesitate to take the stern action demanded, we fail in strength of soul, and let slip the dogs of war to every extreme of weakness and wildness, to create depravity and horror that will ultimately destroy us. A true soldier of freedom will not hesitate to strike vigorously and strike home, knowing that on his resolution will depend the restoration and defence of liberty. But he will always remember that restraint is the great attribute that separates man from beast, that retaliation is the vicious resource of the tyrant and the slave, that magnanimity is the splendour of manhood, and he will remember that he strikes not at his enemy's life, but at his misdeed, and in destroying the misdeed, he makes not only for his own freedom, but even for his enemy's regeneration. This may be for most of us perhaps too great a dream, but for him who reads into the heart of the question and for the true shaping of his course it will stand. He will never forget, even in the thickest fight, that the enemy of today and yesterday may be the genuine comrade of tomorrow. If it is imperative that we should fix unalterably our guiding principles before we are plunged unprepared into the fight, it is even more urgent we should clear the mind to the truth now, for we have fallen into the dangerous habit of deferring important questions on the plea that the time is not ripe. In a word, we lack moral strength, and so that virtue that is to safeguard us in time of war is the great virtue that will redeem us in times of servility. It need not be further laboured that in a state enslaved every mean thing flourishes. The admission of it makes clear that in such a state it is more important that every evil be resisted. In the normal condition of liberty many temporary evils may arise, yet they are not dangerous. In the glow of a people's freedom they waste and die as disease dies in the sunlight. But where independence is suppressed and a people degenerate, a little evil is in an atmosphere to grow, and it grows and expands, and evils multiply and destroy. That is why men of high spirit working to regenerate a fallen people must be more insistent to watch every little defect and weak tendency than in a braver time would leave the soul unruffled. This is why every difficulty, once it becomes evident, is ripe for settlement. To evade the issue is to invite disaster. Resolution alone will save us in our many dangers. But a plea for policy will be raised to evade a particular and urgent question. People won't unite on it. That's one cry. Ignorant people will be led astray. That's another cry. There is always some excuse ready for evasion. The difficulty is that every party likes some part of the truth. No party likes it all. But we must have it all, every line of it. We want no popular additions and no philosophic selections. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This must be the rule for everything concerning which a man has a public duty and ought to have a public opinion. There is a dangerous tendency gaining ground of slurring over vital things because the settlement of them involves great difficulty and may involve great danger. But whatever the issue is, we must face it. It is a step forward to bring men together on points of agreement. But men come thus together not without a certain amount of suspicion. In a fight for freedom, that latent suspicion would become a mastering fear to seize and destroy us. We must allay it now. We must lead men to discuss points of difference with respect, forbearance, and courage, to find a consistent way of life for all that will inspire confidence in all. At present we inspire confidence in no one. It would be fatal to hide the fact. This is a necessary step to bringing matters to a head. We cannot hope to succeed all at once, but we must keep the great aim in view. There will be objections on all sides, from the blasé man of the world, concerned only for his comfort, the mean man of business, concerned only for his profits, the man of policy, always looking for a middle way, a certain type of religious pessimist who always spies danger in every proposal, and many others. We need not consider the comfort of the first, nor the selfishness of the second, but the third and fourth require a word. The man of policy offers me his judgment instead of a clear consideration of the truth. 'Tis he who says, "You and I can discuss certain things privately. We are educated. We understand. Ignorant people can't understand, and you only make mischief in supposing it. It's not wise." To him I reply, "You are afraid to speak the whole truth. I am afraid to hide it. You are filled with the danger to ignorant people of having out everything. I am filled with the danger to you of suppressing anything. I do not propose to you that you can with the whole truth make ignorant people profound, but I say you must have the whole truth out for your own salvation." Here is the danger. We see life within certain limitations, and cannot see the possibly infinite significance of something we would put by. It is of grave importance that we see it rightly, and in the difficulties of the case our only safe course is to take the evidence life offers without prejudice and without fear, and write it down. When the matter is grave, let it be taken with all the mature deliberation and care its gravity demands, but once the evidence is clearly seen, let us for our own salvation write it down. For any man to set his petty judgment above the need for setting down the truth is madness, and I refuse to do it. There is a religious pessimist to consider. To him I say, I take religion more seriously. I take it not to evade the problems of life, but to solve them. When I tell him to have no fear, this is not my indifference to the issue, but a tribute to the faith that is in me. Let us be careful to do the right thing. Then fear is inconsistent with faith. Nor can I understand the other attitude. 2,000 years after the preaching of the Sermon on the Mount, we are to go about whispering to one another what is wise. To conclude, now and in every phase of the coming struggle, the strong mind is a greater need than the strong hand. We must be passionate, but the mind must guide and govern our passion. In the aberrations of the weak mind decrying resistance, let us not lose our balance and defy brute strength. At a later stage we must consider the ethics of resistance to the civil power. The significance of what is written now will become more apparent then. Let the cultivation of a brave, high spirit be our great task. It will make of each man's soul an unassailable fortress. Armies may fail, but it resists forever. The body it informs may be crushed, the spirit in passing breathes on other souls, and other hearts are fired to action, and the fight goes on to victory. To the man whose mind is true and resolute, ultimate victory is assured. No sophistry can sap his resistance, no weakness can tempt him to savage reprisals. He will neither abandon his heritage nor poison his nature, and in every crisis he is steadfast, in every issue justified. Rejoice, then, good comrades. Our souls are still our own. Through the coldness and depression of the time there has lighted a flash of the old fire. The old enthusiasm, warm and passionate, is again steering us. We are forward to uphold our country's right, to fight for her liberty, and to justify our own generation. We shall conquer. Let the enemy count his dreadnoughts and number off his legions. Where are now the legions of Rome and Carthage? And the spirit of freedom they challenged is alive and animating the young nations of today. Hold we our heads high, then, and we shall bear our flag bravely through every fight. Persistent, consistent, straightforward, and fearless, so shall we discipline the soul to great deeds, and make it indomitable. In the indomitable soul lies the assurance of our ultimate victory.